Welcome to Spaces, built by Bush Construction, a podcast that brings genuine conversations that opens minds to creative ideas in construction, design, and development. We'll share in-depth stories as an experienced commercial contractor and design firm, as well as our candid interviews with business leaders as it relates to the construction industry. So let's get started. Today is our 5th episode out of 6 in the Construction Delivery Methods series. While typically there are the 4 main delivery methods that we have already discussed: design, bid, build, or hard bid, construction manager as agent, or CMA, construction manager as constructor, or CMC, and design build, we decided to throw in an outlier: development. Working with a developer could open up options for you and meet the need of your new facility that you may not have previously considered. Joining our podcast team today is Bryce Henderson. Bryce is the Vice President of Development at Bush Construction. He is a genius at what he does and offered to let AJ, Michael, Allie, and I ask him a few questions after AJ gives an overview on this delivery method. Thanks for tuning in. So we have 6 delivery methods. 5 of them are more common. The 6th one is a kind of our bonus round that we're going to talk about next episode. But today we're talking about development. This one also is a little bit different. So AJ, do you want to get us started into what exactly development means?
You're right, Amy. This isn't technically considered by most to be a delivery method. So we'll call it a non-traditional delivery method. But it's a different way a client can engage in a construction project that may be different than what our standard delivery methods would be. So we are a construction company. Our goal and aspiration every day is to build spaces, renovate spaces for folks that want to have their business be affected by the surrounding and the environment they're in, to help them be more successful. However, some of our clients have no interest in raising the funds to do a project like this or build a building, or getting bank construction loans, or all the other burdens related to building ownership. Additionally, some of our clients may not have the experience or time to go through all the challenges that exist in finding entitlements and other financial advantages for building a project. So, the developer delivery method may be good for them.
I like that. That gives a nice, in a nutshell, overview of what we're going to be talking about. Can you give us maybe some of those pros, cons, pluses, minuses? Like, when would this be a great idea to use, and maybe when you should think of a different delivery method?
Sure. So let's start with the pros. This is really best for owners who may not want or be able to own their own building with the complexity of design, construction, financing. They just don't want to get involved in that. Maybe they want to do it at the completion of construction. They want to own it, but don't want to go through the headaches of all that in the meantime. So this may be a good delivery method for them. It also may be a good delivery method for owners with, we'll call them underutilized assets. Now, this could be a vacant building or a piece of land that hasn't yet been developed, who are really looking to maximize value by minimizing their own time investment in making sure that underutilized asset starts performing better. Additionally, this is probably best for business operators that never want to own their own building because their money is better put to work in their operating business rather than in owning real estate. So if an owner of a business says, I want to invest in my operating company, not the real estate, maybe this is a good model for them. And then finally, this is a good model to use when you understand that developers know how to manage entitlements. We're talking about tax increment financing, other forms of tax credits, creative financing strategies, lease negotiations, tenant management, property management, all those things that developers understand that maybe a building owner doesn't have as their first priority or first interest. That may be a time when to use the developer delivery model. So let's look at cons. When a business owner doesn't want to own their own building, the entity that does own that building will want to be compensated for it, because they're tying up their capital in owning a building that they're not utilizing for their business. So that cost of owning the building is passed along to the tenant of the building or the business owner in the form of a higher rental rate than maybe that business owner would have paid had they owned the building themselves. Another con of this delivery method is it may take longer to engage a developer to build a building or develop a project than a building owner might be able to do for themselves. First, you've got to find a developer. They will go through the process of the entitlements and everything else that's involved. However, by getting a developer involved, you will likely experience a financial benefit from involving them. Even though it may take a little bit longer, the financial benefits are often worth it.
So Bryce, we'd like to tap into you and your expertise and let us know when the best time to use the development delivery model would be.
Certainly. As AJ alluded to, the best time for development is when you've got an owner or even a municipality. A lot of times we get RFPs, requests for proposals from cities because they have an underutilized piece of asset. It's either a piece of ground that needs to be developed or an old building that either you've been sitting on or the city's been sitting on, and it's a blight and everyone would love to see something happen to it. So that's a great time for when development is there. Development is usually a key aspect when you've got a difficult asset that needs a lot of these entitlements to make it work. And really as to when is the right time chronologically, usually the earlier the better. As AJ alluded to, it takes some time. I mean, whether it's engaging the developer, but a lot of times when you're dealing with municipalities and states trying to get that quote-unquote free money, it's just takes time. Although every layer that you add on of complexity for development, while it brings a lot of benefit to the project, also adds time. And so engaging a developer early on when you've got an idea allows us to maximize the timeline, but it also hopefully maximizes the benefit for the project.
Do tenants reach out to you and say, I'm looking for space, can you help me? Or is it usually they see that you're developing a building and then ask if you have space available in there?
It's some of both. A lot of, once we've got a project up and the construction sign's there, you have a lot of tenants asking about, hey, I see you've got available space, what's available? And then that's a part of our development process is engaging with the owner and the tenant to kind of negotiate that lease and get something that works for both of them. But a lot of our development process is more geared toward we have an end user or an owner of the building that is looking to say, hey, I've got an idea, but I don't know how to get, I've got a grand plan for the building, I don't know how to get it there, and or I'm running my business 10, 12 hours a day, I don't have time to go follow up with the city or follow up with the state and track all this stuff down. I'm willing to compensate you to help me get there, and that's kind of what development does for the owner.
Mr. Henderson, can I ask a question, please? Development, generally speaking, or at least that's kind of what I see in the media and things, generally carries a negative connotation. But what I've learned through working with you is that there's a lot of creativity and there's a lot of different things that the developer and the design team can kind of bring to the table for that. So can you explain what makes a good developer versus some of the kind of negative connotation stuff that you hear?
Yeah, I think the negative side of that is general. Our society loves to feed on negativity, and that's usually what makes the news 9 times out of 10. So, yeah, the industry is rife with shysters and folks that are, again, I think to be a good developer, you've got to have a bit of bravado and be bigger than life character sometimes. A lot of times that's what attracts a city or somebody else to want to do a deal with someone. But again, what you don't see is a lot of great projects that have an impact on the community, whether it's taking care of blight, hiring jobs, providing housing for low-income families. There's a lot of great positivity that's out there with development that you generally just don't see. I think what's the good and the bad is a combination of, as you mentioned, you need to be creative. Anytime in a development deal, there's going to be a half dozen to a dozen problems, and the good developers take those problems and find a way to solve them as opposed to just walking away. And I think the walking away piece is where you also see some of that negativity. You get cities or owners get burnt because a developer maybe goes in and tries to make something happen, and as soon as their returns don't get where they want them to be, rather than fight to make it work, they drop the project and move on to the next one. And then, really, again, it's part of it too is just character. You've got to get comfortable with who you're working with in any aspect of life. But that's one of the big reasons why I was drawn to come start the development department at Bush is a great company. They do solid work. They construct things great. They've got a great reputation. So that's a company I wanted to associate myself with, and it should be a company that any owner would want to work with.
On that note, can you tell us a little bit about what your background is and maybe why that background has separated us, you've helped Bush Construction separate a little bit away from what that typical perception of a developer is.
Yeah, I entered the development world kind of atypically. I didn't go to get my management degree in development or anything like that. I was actually a senior manager in the tax department at Deloitte and had a client that was in real estate development. I am not your typical developer. I'm not that larger than life character. I'm more of the in the trenches, get the job done, don't really care about who gets the credit as long as the project gets done. So I think that separates me a little bit. I'm considerably more conservative than your average developer, but again, I think it's works when you're dealing with the city, works when you're dealing with trying to get financing. As long as you're being conservative and realistic, you get burnt a whole lot less.
Tell me, how was it that you ended up at Bush Construction? Why did you make the decision to come here versus going somewhere else?
Well, one of the big things that drew me here beyond just the reputation of Bush was the fact that we're kind of vertically integrated, where we do design and construction in-house. So generally, when I was working for high net worth individuals doing development, one of my biggest problems was always tracking down design and or getting the construction team to get me cost estimates, because obviously those are big components of a project. And so this allows me to have in-house folks that I trust and can depend on, I know do quality work, and at the same time, it's easy for me to track down and get an answer from because they're part of the team and looking just to get the project done.
So, Bryce, I was approached by a real estate investor who understood that we do development projects, and he said, "Hey, can I invest in your projects?" Tell me, is that one of the models that we use to raise funds for our development work?
Yeah, for the most part, most of our projects are sourced in one of two ways. One, if we've got an owner group that already has a building or a project or an asset that they've decided they want to acquire and redevelop, and then we just go down the avenue there. Or alternatively, we find a building or a project that we think makes sense, is financially viable, but we don't have the equity in-house currently, so we'll go out and raise funds either through local investors, working with our subcontractors, but also the plan is to have a delivery method on our website where interested investors can see which projects we have currently in the pipeline, be able to send us some contact information so that we can reach out and provide them with some prospectus on the project. So yeah, there's definitely an opportunity if you're a real estate investor or just a general investor looking to diversify your portfolio. You have a chance to invest in real estate without all the headache of tracking down a broker and finding a project and managing it yourself. You can just invest in one of our projects and we'll just keep you updated along the process.
I'm wondering if you have like a real world example, a project that you have worked on the development side that would help maybe explain even further how this works.
Yeah, so our best example right now is we did what's called the Hershey Lofts project in downtown Muscatine. Was a vacant office building that was, again, as we pointed out, underutilized asset. It had a small commercial tenant on the first floor and lower level and largely a vacant building from floors 2 through 5. So that was one of the delivery methods where we didn't have an owner. We went and raised equity for the project through internal investors and subcontractors looking to invest some of their profits into the deal. And yeah, it was again, every development project is a way to learn. But again, that was a full scale. We did design, construction, and development all in-house, financed it through a local lender, but received historic federal and state historic tax credits, received a tax abatement through the city of Muscatine, and also got a state of Iowa brownfield grant that helped fund the project. And that one was placed in service in December of 2019, and I believe is somewhere around 90% leased on the residential side and 94% leased on the commercial side. So all in all, even through the current economic and kind of craziness of the world, we placed that project in service right before it all hit, but it's continued to get leased up and is a performing asset that it wasn't without its trials and tribulations along the way, but any development project is. But in general, it's a really nice performing asset and one that someone can go check out online and take a look at what Bush can deliver.
I think that particular project is an interesting one to speak to the vertical integration. Also, I remember we all three, representatives from construction, design, and then Bryce with development, looked at that building and knew pretty quickly that it felt right. Like the proportions of the building were right. We kind of knew how it was going to lay out. We knew we had some really huge challenges with the fact that it was a single building that we're going to need to basically partition off into two. And within probably a week or two, we were able to kind of test viability on that project, come up with a plan, come up with a general construction budget, get some people to give us numbers. And then at the same time, the owner, the current owner of the building, or the owner of the building at the time, was very happy that we kind of brought that quick turnaround, that quick service, professional quality to how we said, here's how we're going to approach it. We want it to be this. Here's the vision. Here's how the numbers are going to work. Here's how the construction is going to work. And from there, we kind of set the tone, and that one became successful.
Not all owners would be suited, potentially, for this delivery method. Like, say, a more conservative owner wouldn't. So I guess on the level of risk, and then how do you assure return? Is there an assurance of returns?
So I guess the first question is the risk. Yeah, I mean, generally, if the simple answer is if you want to go to the bank and finance your own project and put in considerably more amount of equity, you can avoid a lot of the risk that goes along with whether or not you're going to get the tax credits or work with the city to find out an entitlement that will work for you. Yeah, this is a riskier, but again, it's a risk-reward matrix. So yeah, I would say that this isn't necessarily for every owner, but at the same time, a good case in point is we have a client in Aleta, Illinois, that we did some preliminary analysis and said, hey, we can go down the more traditional development route, and here's what you'll get. And he ultimately made the decision of, I don't want anyone telling me what I can and can't do to my building, and I can move faster if I don't do it. And we at least gave him the information so that they can make an informed decision. And I think that's what we would do with any client is, hey, we're not the one of, hey, here's all the free money you're going to get, and we're all going to hold hands and hop, skip, and jump down the pathway. It's more of the, hey, here's what's out there. Here's what's available. Being honest with the likelihood of some of this stuff going to come to fruition. I mean, a big case in point is new market tax credits, which is a very complicated program that's geared towards blighted areas. If you read the letter of the law, it's all sorts of businesses qualify for it, but if you talk to the people that actually work in that space, it's a very limited window of what's actually receiving those credits these days. And that's where a lot of people get turned in the wrong direction is they go to a seminar or they read something on the internet and says, oh, well, what I'm doing definitely qualifies. Well, legally, yes, but that's where you need a development person to come in and kind of give you a more realistic spin on where the world is at and how likely it is, whether it's the viability of a credit and or even just where is the financing and where is the pricing for those credits. If you're looking to find an investor for them, you just kind of need someone that's dealing in this space on a regular basis to give you an honest opinion of where it's going to be. And then our goal is really just to make sure the owner is as informed as possible and let them make an educated decision. And hopefully they choose to go down the development path because that keeps me employed. But ultimately what we want is good projects that turn a good profit for the owner. And whether that's through the development process or just working with our GC and design team to get the project done, we just want the client to be happy.
Bryce mentioned earlier there's a couple scenarios where owners with, call them underutilized assets, may want to contact us. But give us some more guidance on that. If I'm a building owner and it's primarily empty, what are some things I should keep in mind if I'm a building owner? Like maybe I've got a potential user for that building, or on the flip side, if I've got a vacant piece of land, what are some things I should think about as an owner before contacting you saying, hey, I've got a vacant building or I've got an empty piece of land?
I think realistically is you need to have an idea of whether or not you've got an idea of what you want that to be. Because while we're great at modeling what we think it can be, projects are more viable when the owner is passionate about what's going to be done with it. Because if you're just contacting me saying I've got some land and I want as much money as I can get for it, those deals don't usually come to fruition. What we want to have is you've got an owner with a vision of this is what I see this being, or I've got a great idea for a ground floor tenant, but I don't know what to do with the upstairs. We can work with that. But yeah, it's more of, I think you need to take some time to realize if you've got an idea for the project, and also be willing to admit that it's going to take some time and likely some money just to even get that vision of a dream to come to some sort of shape so that we can get someplace. Because development doesn't happen overnight, and even getting to a stage where we're engaging financing for something is going to cost some money. Obviously, our goal is to try to minimize that spend as much as we can, but it's gonna take some time and some money, and any development deal needs at least a couple people involved to have some passion behind it to make it work.
Looping back around to the Hershey building example, at what point does Bush Construction as a developer step out of the project?
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question. I mean, generally from a GC design process, usually shortly after place and service. But on the development side, it's more of a complicated question because it's, sometimes we invest in a project ourselves. So then we're going to be involved. And generally, our plan is to find a property manager that manages the process. And so we're considerably more steps back in the deal. But if we're either continuing to be an investor in the deal or Hershey is another one where the managing member pretty much is leaning on us as their representative to manage the project because they're out in California and not looking to actively manage the manager. And so we're considerably more active in that project. But again, it's one of those things where we'll work with the owners through the construction process and have a plan for succession so that they've got an idea of how involved we're going to be. But our goal is never to leave the owners in the project high and dry just because we've collected our fee and we're done. It's more of making sure that, if it's 3 months, 6 months, a year through the process, making sure that there's a smooth transition and it's operating the way it needs to be, because the only way we maintain our reputation is by delivering quality projects to the owners.
Mr. Henderson, you mentioned entitlements probably a dozen times throughout this. Can you explain what that means? You're not talking about like young kids who have everything. You're talking about something else.
We could talk about both, but in general, I was more referring to, in general, when we say entitlements, there's different incentives and tax credits that are available depending on where the project's located. And they can range from tax abatement or TIF, which is just working with the city to minimize your taxes long term, or, case in point, you've got a vacant building that for the most part is paying no taxes because it's valued at nothing by the city. Well, if we go in and develop this project and now it's got a building that's should be paying $50,000 a year in taxes, a lot of times you can work with municipality to say, fine, can we keep 45 to 50,000, 45,000 of that 50 over a 10-year span? The city's not really out any money because it was getting nothing beforehand, but allows another mechanism to bring some additional funds into the project. And then obviously states have credits tied to historic buildings, enterprise zones, brownfield, which is if you've got a site that is got potential environmental issues, there's some states have funds available to help offset some of those costs. That's kind of where the development team comes in, is A, identifying what some of those incentives are, B, figuring out the likelihood of actually achieving some of them, and then C, putting the work in to go get them.
This was very interesting. I really liked hearing the words creative and passionate. And so I think that this is when we're trying to define who is best suited for these delivery methods that we're talking about. Today's development delivery model, if you're that creative, passionate owner and you have property that you want repurposed, revitalized, come up with a great plan, we would love to hear from you.